I remember the first time I drove into that town. The sky was painted in shades of gray, and the mist hung thick over the winding road. There wasn't much to the town, barely a handful of houses scattered among overgrown streets, and a single gas station that looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. As I passed through the old wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Grazeville," I thought to myself that it looked like the kind of place you only saw in old horror movies. I had just taken the job as the town's new night guard at the local factory. Desperation had led me here. Too many bills, not enough paychecks, and this odd little place was my only option. As I drove through the desolate streets, I noticed how quiet it was. Not the usual stillness of a small town. No, it was different. It was the kind of quiet that felt almost wrong, like something was waiting, watching. I pulled up to the old stone building that housed the factory. It looked ancient, with ivy crawling up its brick walls and windows that seemed to sag under the weight of years of neglect. But as I parked, I saw a figure standing by the door. A man, older than I expected, with a thick coat and a serious expression on his face. He didn't smile as I approached, and his gaze never left me. "You must be the new guy," he said in a voice that barely broke the silence. "I'm Adam, the night manager here. If you want to survive this place, you need to follow the rules." I raised an eyebrow, unsure if he was joking or not. "Rules?" I asked. He didn't laugh. "7 rules," he said. "Follow them, or you won't last the night." At this point, I was more curious than anything. What kind of rules did a town like this have? And what kind of place had these kinds of precautions? He handed me a small paper, yellowed with age, and simply said, "Don't break them." Not even once. I stared at the paper as he walked off without another word. There, scrawled in messy handwriting, were the 7 rules. Stay inside the factory after dark. If you hear footsteps, don't turn around. Do not speak to the man with the lantern. Never go into the woods behind the factory. If the clock strikes 3 a.m., close all doors and windows. Do not eat anything that comes from the town. Leave before sunrise. The rules were simple enough, yet they carried an unsettling weight. Stay inside. Easy. Close all doors and windows. Sure, I could do that. But then there were the others. A man with a lantern? What did that mean? And the woods behind the factory? Wasn't that just part of the town's outskirts? As I entered the factory, the dim light inside flickered, casting long shadows over the machines. It was almost as if the place had been abandoned for years but still worked tirelessly, keeping itself alive in the dark. I didn't see anyone else, just the hum of the machines and the occasional rustle of something unseen. I started my first round of checks, making sure all doors were locked and that no one had broken in. As I passed by the clock in the hallway, I felt an odd chill. The time read 2:45 a.m., and for some reason, I felt my heart start to beat faster. The factory was quiet, but I could hear something faintly, like a tapping sound. My mind told me it was nothing, but my feet froze. The footsteps. Could this be one of those rules in action? My instinct screamed at me to turn around, to check the source of the sound. But rule number 2 flashed through my mind. If you hear footsteps, don't turn around. I had to force myself to keep walking. I could feel the presence of someone behind me, just out of sight. Each tap of their shoes on the floor was getting louder, closer, but I didn't dare look. Suddenly, the sound stopped. A deep silence washed over me, and I wasn't sure if it was a relief or more terrifying. Was it gone? Or had I just walked into something much worse? I didn't know what to think. I didn't want to break the rules, especially not the first night. but something in my gut told me this was just the beginning of whatever nightmare was waiting in Grazeville. The clock struck 2:55 a.m. The minutes ticked by slowly, and my mind raced with questions I had no answers for. My body was on high alert, but I reminded myself that this place was just a small town. A few strange sounds and unsettling rules didn't necessarily mean anything supernatural was going on. Right? Yet, the weight of the silence and the oddities of the rules gnawed at me, tugging at something deep in my gut. I wanted to dismiss it all, tell myself it was just the stress of the new job, but something about this place didn't let you forget. I moved through the factory, checking the doors and windows as I had been instructed. The ticking of the clock echoed through the halls, and I found myself glancing at it more than once. 3 a.m. was fast approaching, and I remembered Rule 5 with a growing sense of unease. If the clock strikes 3 a.m., close all doors and windows. At exactly 2:59 a.m., I felt the first stirrings of anxiety. I was standing near the front door halfway through my rounds when the clock rang out. The sound was louder than I expected, sharp, insistent, as though the very air vibrated with it. My heart pounded in my chest as I hurried to the nearest window, closing the blinds tightly and locking the latch. My hands trembled as I moved from one window to the next, double-checking the locks. It wasn't the task itself that had me rattled, it was the feeling of being watched. Every so often, I'd glance up, expecting to see something out of place, but there was nothing. Still, the feeling persisted, growing stronger the longer I worked. As I moved back to the hallway to check the back door, I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. There, standing just outside one of the factory's back windows, was a figure holding a lantern. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was tall, cloaked in shadow, with a lantern hanging from his hand. I couldn't see his face, just the dim, flickering glow of the lantern illuminating the dark space beyond. The rules. The man with the lantern. I didn't know what to do. The instinct to call out to him, to approach and ask if he needed help, nearly overwhelmed me. But I remembered Rule 3. Do not speak to the man with the lantern. The figure didn't move. He just stood there, still as stone, his lantern casting a faint, eerie light around him. The air seemed to grow heavier as I watched, and every muscle in my body screamed at me to stay away. But I couldn't tear my eyes away. My feet were frozen to the floor, and my mind raced through the possibilities. Was this some sort of test? A trap? Or was he part of whatever strange thing was happening in this town? Just as I was about to move, the man in the distance lifted the lantern and its light brightened, briefly illuminating his face. I could see his eyes, or what looked like eyes, dark, hollow pits that stared back at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I couldn't look away, though every part of me screamed to run. Then, as abruptly as he had appeared, the man vanished. The lantern light flickered out, and the figure disappeared into the night. There was no sound, no movement, just an overwhelming sense of emptiness where he had been. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the spot where he had been. But the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. There was no lantern, no footsteps, no man. He had just vanished. I swallowed hard, my throat dry and tight. What in the world was going on? I didn't waste any more time. I followed the rules, shaking hands or not, and finished my rounds as quickly as I could. I double-checked the doors, making sure everything was locked tight. I wasn't sure what I had just witnessed, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't alone in this place, and if I had any hope of surviving this night, I would have to follow the rules to the letter. I looked at the clock. 3:10 a.m. It was only 10 minutes since the man with the lantern disappeared, but I already felt like I had lived a lifetime in those 10 minutes. The factory was still, too still, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was waiting for me. I sat in the break room, trying to steady my nerves. I told myself that it was probably just an old town legend, someone who had been here before and got too comfortable. It was probably nothing. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was something far worse at play here. Something darker. The man with the lantern. That was no mere town figure. He was a part of something bigger, and I had just witnessed it. The rest of the night dragged on. I walked the factory's halls with every sense on high alert, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Every little sound felt amplified. The hum of the machines, the creak of the building settling, the slight tap of my boots on the floor, it all felt like it was happening too loud, too close. I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. When the clock finally struck 5 a.m., I didn't feel relief, not in the way I had expected. The weight of the night lingered. The man with the lantern, the unsettling rules, the strange occurrences, they all blended together into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And as the sun slowly began to rise, casting its pale light through the broken windows, I realized that Grazeville wasn't just a town. It was a place of rules, and those rules were keeping something far darker at bay. As the first rays of light began to creep through the cracked windows, I thought I had made it through the worst of it. The strange encounter with the man holding the lantern, the unnerving silence that followed, it all felt surreal, like a bad dream. I kept telling myself that I was just being paranoid, that the stress of the night had gotten to me. But even as the sun rose and I prepared to leave the factory, something gnawed at me. It wasn't until the very last moments of my shift that I understood just how wrong I was. I walked out into the parking lot to stretch my legs, thinking I could finally relax. The air was cool, the sun just breaking through the horizon. I stood near my car, feeling the weight of the night lifting off me. I was ready to go home, to forget about Grazeville and the strange rules. But then, as I glanced to my left, I saw the woods. It had been there all night, right behind the factory, stretching into the distance, dark and foreboding. I had noticed the trees as I entered the factory grounds, but I hadn't paid them any attention. Now, standing in the early light, they felt alive. The branches swayed, but there was no wind. The trunks twisted unnaturally, as if the forest was shifting, adjusting to something unseen. And, most unsettling of all, a faint whisper seemed to emanate from the trees, like voices beckoning me to come closer. I quickly pushed the thought from my mind. The rules were clear after all. Rule 4. Never go into the woods behind the factory. It was a simple directive, but it was one that filled me with unease. Something about that rule, in particular, felt final. Like the consequences of breaking it were too severe to even imagine. As I stood there, my body tense, the wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the faintest scent of damp earth. The kind of scent that reminded you of something forgotten, of something buried deep in the soil. My hand clenched around the door handle of my car, the metal cool against my palm. I was about to get in when I saw something. It was a figure standing just beyond the tree line. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, my mind still reeling from the strange events of the night. But then the figure stepped forward, out from the shadows of the trees. It was tall, cloaked in a long, dark coat, that swayed with the movement, its face obscured in shadow. The figure didn't move like a person, though. It glided, its feet never quite touching the ground. Its presence felt like a weight pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I stepped back, my heart racing in my chest. The figure continued its slow, deliberate approach. My mind screamed at me to get inside the car, to lock the doors, to forget I ever saw it. But I was frozen in place, unable to look away. The figure stopped just at the edge of the tree line. It didn't say anything, didn't move closer, but its presence, it was overwhelming, like it was staring into my very soul. The woods behind it seemed to bend and shift, as if the forest itself was part of the figure, an extension of whatever it was. I remembered the rule. Never go into the woods behind the factory, but the figure seemed to be calling to me. It didn't speak, but its energy was palpable, like it was pulling me toward it with an invisible force. I knew, in that moment, that whatever was in those woods wasn't something I was supposed to understand. And yet, a strange part of me wanted to go closer, to step into the trees and see what lay beyond. I shook my head violently, breaking the trance. The man with the lantern, the figure in the woods, they weren't part of Grazeville's rules. They were something else, something I didn't have the strength or knowledge to deal with. I had to leave. I couldn't stay. I pulled open the door of my car and slipped inside, my hands shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I quickly put the car in reverse. But as I backed out of the parking space, my eyes involuntarily flicked back toward the woods. The figure was gone. I didn't stop to think. I didn't look around. I hit the gas, speeding away from the factory in Grazeville. The air in my lungs felt fresher as I drove away, like I had just broken free from something I couldn't understand. The sun was up now, and the town felt miles behind me. The factory, the rules, the woods, it was all behind me, and I didn't have to deal with it anymore. Or so I thought. The road ahead was empty, save for the occasional rusted street sign and a few broken-down houses that looked like they hadn't been lived in for decades. I kept driving, not knowing where I was going, just wanting to get away. The thought of Grazeville and the factory seemed distant, like it was someone else's problem, someone else's nightmare. But as I drove further, the familiar road began to shift. The trees lining the road had begun to grow denser, more twisted. The road narrowed, and the pavement started to crumble beneath my tires. I wasn't on the main highway anymore. I was lost. I slammed on the brakes, panic rising in my chest. The sign at the side of the road read, "Welcome to Grazeville." I had never left. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, staring at the road sign as if it had somehow materialized out of thin air. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat like a drum signaling that something was terribly wrong. The town had seemed so far behind me, miles away when I'd driven through it just minutes ago, and now here it was again. Welcome to Grazeville. How had I turned around? How had I ended up back here? I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was just a mistake, a simple misdirection. Maybe I had taken a wrong turn, but deep down, I knew better. The town wasn't just a place, it was a maze, and once you entered, it seemed like you could never escape. I shoved the gear shift into drive and hit the gas, trying to push forward, trying to get out of this trap. But the more I drove, the more everything felt wrong. The road seemed to narrow with every passing second, and the trees that had once been distant were now closing in, towering over the road like twisted sentinels. The houses I passed had a rundown look to them, but as I glanced through the broken windows, I could have sworn I saw movement inside. Shadows darting across rooms, figures that didn't belong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and my grip on the steering wheel tightened. I turned the corner, heading for what I thought would be the main road out of town, but instead I found myself at a dead end. I slammed the brakes, stopping just inches from a rusted chain-link fence that had been erected at the end of the road. Beyond it, the woods stretched on in an endless sea of darkness, their twisted branches reaching toward the sky like claws. I was trapped. I could feel my pulse quicken. I scanned the area for some sign of where I was. There were no street lights, no signs, nothing. It was as if the world had just stopped and Grazeville had swallowed me whole. I was no longer just a visitor. I was part of it now, a piece of something much darker than I had imagined. I checked the rearview mirror. The town was behind me, and it looked as if it was growing farther away. But in a way, it felt like it was moving closer, enveloping me. It was suffocating. I had no idea what to do, no plan, just instinct telling me to move, to get away. I couldn't sit here forever. I put the car in reverse and slowly backed up, trying to get enough space to turn around. But when I checked the rear view again, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The man with the lantern. There he was, standing just beyond the fence, his figure illuminated by the flickering light of the lantern. He hadn't been there before, and yet now he was impossibly close. His dark coat seemed to blend with the shadows of the trees behind him, and his eyes, those hollow, dark eyes, were locked on mine. He didn't move. He didn't need to. The lantern in his hand cast a sickly glow that seemed to dance with the fog that had rolled in. I snapped my eyes away from the mirror, my heart racing. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. I turned the wheel sharply, driving forward again, determined to find any way out of this nightmare. But as I passed the road I had just turned onto, something caught my eye. A figure standing in the distance. A woman, her face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, her long, dark coat flowing in the wind. She stood on the edge of the road, just out of reach. She wasn't there to help. She wasn't there to guide me out of town. She was waiting. I sped up, my hands gripping the wheel so tight that my knuckles turned white. I could hear my breath coming in ragged gasps. The town was closing in around me. It wasn't just a physical place anymore, it was an entity, a force that bent the rules of space and time. The woods, the man with the lantern, the woman in the road. Everything felt like it was part of some cruel, unbreakable cycle. The town had a grip on me, and the longer I stayed, the tighter it held. The rules I had been told to follow, the ones that I had dismissed as absurd, weren't just guidelines, they were warnings. Warnings I had ignored at my own peril. I turned down another street, praying for some kind of way out, but instead I found myself at the edge of the cemetery. I recognized it immediately. The same cemetery from last night, with its iron gates standing tall, the tombstones leaning at odd angles, and the eerie silence that hung in the air. I didn't even know how I had gotten here. I hadn't seen any signs for the cemetery. I hadn't even passed any roads leading to it. It was as if the town had just pulled me in, leading me back to where I had started. I sat there for a moment, the car idling in front of the gates. The cemetery felt like the last place I wanted to be. The darkness of the night wrapped itself around me, the trees seeming to press in closer, the silence so profound that I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat. It was the same eerie feeling I had experienced on my first night, the feeling that the place was alive watching me, waiting for me to break the rules. And that's when I saw it. The black rose, the gravestone with the black rose, just like the one I had seen the night before. The very same one that had been part of the rule I was warned about. Do not approach the gravestone marked with the black rose. My breath caught in my throat. I knew what I had to do. I had to leave. I couldn't stay here anymore. But as I started to turn the car around, I saw something that stopped me cold. A figure. A tall, cloaked figure standing next to the black rose gravestone. It wasn't moving, just watching me. And in the dim light of my headlights, I saw the faint glow of its eyes. Those same hollow, empty eyes. I slammed the car in reverse, desperate to get away, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, waiting, watching. I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of Grazeville, the rules, the ever-watchful eyes, it was all too much. I slammed the car into gear and sped down the road, my hands shaking violently as I gripped the wheel. The figure by the black rose gravestone stayed in my peripheral vision, its eerie presence haunting every inch of my thoughts. I couldn't afford to look at it again, but I could feel its gaze on me. I was being hunted, cornered by something much larger than myself, something that had no intention of letting me go. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator, the engine roaring as I sped through the town. The houses blurred past, their broken windows like empty eyes staring into my soul. The trees, the fog, the street lights, they all seemed to stretch and warp as I drove, making the town feel like a never-ending labyrinth. It was as though Grazeville itself had twisted into a maze, a place where time and distance held no meaning. The further I tried to run, the deeper I was pulled back in. I'd been driving for what felt like hours, but when I glanced at the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my heart stop. The man with the lantern. He was standing in the middle of the road, his figure illuminated by the flickering light of the lantern. He didn't move, just stood there, watching me. It was as if he had been waiting for me to come back. My stomach twisted in fear, and for a brief moment, I thought about stopping. Maybe I had to face him. Maybe there was something I needed to understand, but no, I couldn't. I had already broken too many rules and the consequences were too real. I swerved the car, narrowly missing the figure, and sped past him. The moment I passed, the lantern light flickered in the mirror, then disappeared entirely. I didn't dare look back. The town was closing in on me, pulling me deeper into its grasp. No matter how fast I drove, I couldn't escape. The road ahead was dark and unfamiliar. I hadn't recognized the path I was on, but I kept driving. The trees seemed to close in on me, the branches twisting into grotesque shapes, their shadows shifting in ways that defied logic. The headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the car's tires hummed steadily against the uneven road. That's when I heard it, the whispering. At first, it was faint, like the rustling of leaves, but as the car sped down the road, the whispers grew louder. They weren't in my head, they were real. The sound of voices, low, hissing, and almost like a chant, rippled through the air. I couldn't make out the words, but it was clear they were coming from all around me. The whispers seemed to bounce off the trees, the car, and even the very air itself. I looked around frantically, hoping for an escape. My eyes darted from side to side, scanning the darkness. The whispers were coming from everywhere now, behind me, ahead of me, and even within the car itself. Don't look at the mirrors. Leave, now. Break the rules. The gate is open. The words twisted in my mind, pushing me to do something, anything, to stop the madness. I felt the chill of fear crawl up my spine, the darkness pressing in on me, suffocating. And then I saw it. The gate. The massive wrought iron gate loomed in front of me, its twisted iron bars stretching up into the sky. It was impossible. I had just passed it, hadn't I? I couldn't have come back to the same place. But there it was, standing tall at the end of the road, the same gate I had driven past hours ago. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, urging me to stop, to turn around. The gate was open. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching as it came to a halt just inches from the open gate. The whispering stopped, but the air around me was thick with dread, heavy with an energy I couldn't describe. Something dark was pulling me toward the gate, as if it was calling me, beckoning me to cross the threshold. I tried to turn the car around, to drive back the way I had come, but the road had changed. The familiar landmarks I had passed just moments ago were now gone, replaced by dense trees and a thick fog that seemed to swallow the car whole. The headlights flickered, and I could barely see the road ahead. The town was gone, replaced by an endless stretch of woods. The whispering returned, louder this time. "You broke the rules." I grabbed the wheel, my knuckles white, and tried to steer the car back onto the road, but the car wouldn't move. The engine sputtered, and the car jerked forward before coming to an abrupt stop. I looked out the window, my eyes wide in terror, but the woods were no longer just trees. They were alive. The branches stretched and twisted, reaching for me, pulling the car deeper into the fog. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. My mind was racing, my heart thundering in my chest. I had to get out of here. But before I could open the door, I saw them. Figures emerging from the trees, their forms tall and elongated, like shadows of nightmares. Their eyes glowed faintly, hollow and empty, their mouths twisted in grotesque smiles. They moved toward the car, gliding through the fog with eerie silence. "Leave. You're not welcome." One of the figures raised its hand, and I saw the faintest flicker of light, the same lantern that the man had been holding. But now, it was bigger, brighter, burning with a cold, unnatural flame. I didn't wait for them to get closer. I threw the car into reverse, my foot slamming on the gas. The car jerked backward, but the figures didn't move. They just stood there, watching me with those dark, empty eyes. "Leave," one of them whispered. "Leave before it's too late." And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. The woods, the figures, the lantern, they all vanished, leaving me alone in the car. The fog began to dissipate, and the road ahead cleared, but I knew that it was too late. I had broken the rules. The town had caught up with me. I couldn't move. The figures, the whispers, the lantern, everything about Grazeville was closing in on me. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest that I thought it might burst, and my hands were trembling uncontrollably as I gripped the steering wheel. I wasn't sure how much more I could take. The weight of the town was suffocating, its rules pulling me deeper into something I didn't understand. The road ahead was no longer familiar, but I knew it didn't matter. I wasn't getting out. The fog was clearing now, but the air around me still felt thick and oppressive. I tried to focus on the road, but it didn't help. No matter which direction I drove in, I ended up at the same place. It was like the road itself was looping, pulling me back to the center of Grazeville. The town wasn't just a physical place anymore. It had become something else, a prison with no way out. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The lantern was still there, flickering in the distance, its faint light casting long shadows across the road. But there was something different about it now. The glow seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, growing stronger with each passing second. My breathing quickened as I realized that the man with the lantern was approaching. I couldn't run anymore. I had no choice but to face whatever was coming. The car jerked forward as if pulled by an invisible force, and I slammed my foot on the brake. The car stopped just short of hitting the massive iron gate that had appeared once again, standing tall at the end of the road. The gate that had been locked before, but now it was open. It beckoned to me. The whispers grew louder, their voices twisting together in a maddening cacophony. It's time. You have to make a choice. I didn't know what to do. The rules had been clear from the start. Leave before sunrise. I had broken every one of them, one by one. The man with the lantern, the woods, the figures, the gate, they were all part of something bigger, something that had been waiting for me to break the rules. And now, it was too late. The lantern grew brighter, and I felt a chill creep over my skin, like something cold was reaching out from the darkness, trying to pull me in. The figure holding the lantern stepped closer, his form emerging from the fog. He didn't say a word, but I could feel his presence all around me. He was the gatekeeper, the one who made sure the rules were followed. And now I had crossed a line. You should have left when you had the chance. His voice was low and raspy, like the sound of old paper crinkling. Now, there's no turning back. I wanted to scream, to beg for help, but I couldn't find the words. The town had already swallowed me whole. Grazeville wasn't just a place, it was a living, breathing entity that had a will of its own. It was never about survival. It was about whether or not you could follow the rules. And once you broke them, once you stepped outside the lines, you were never the same. I turned the key in the ignition, hoping that somehow the car would start and I could break free. But it was no use. The engine sputtered and died, leaving me in complete silence. The figure with the lantern stopped in front of the car, blocking my path. His eyes glowed faintly, hollow and empty, just like the eyes of the figures I had seen before. "There's nowhere to run," he said, his voice cold and final. "The town has claimed you." I had no choice but to get out of the car. My legs were shaking as I stepped onto the road, my body frozen with fear. The man with the lantern was standing right in front of me now, his presence towering over me like a shadow that stretched across the town. I wanted to fight back, to push him away, but I knew it was pointless. The town had already decided my fate. "You broke the rules," he said again, his voice steady and calm. "And now you will stay. Forever." I looked past him toward the gate. It was wide open now, inviting me in, showing me what lay beyond. But I knew better than to walk through. The gate wasn't just a way out. It was the beginning of something far worse. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not knowing who I was apologizing to. Myself? The town? It didn't matter. I had made my choice, and now I had to live with it. The figure with the lantern didn't move. He didn't need to. The air around me grew heavy, and I could feel the ground beneath my feet shift, as if it were alive. The whispering voices surrounded me again, urging me to stay, to accept my fate. I didn't know how much time passed, but I could feel the cold creeping into my bones. The night stretched on, and I knew that I was no longer just a visitor in Grazeville. I was a part of it now. As the sky began to lighten, the man with the lantern turned and started walking toward the open gate. I hesitated for a moment, then followed him, knowing that this was the end. The rules had been set in motion long before I arrived, and now they were taking their toll. I stepped through the gate, and the world around me shifted. The town, the fog, the figures, they all faded away. replaced by an emptiness that stretched into infinity. Grazeville had claimed me. It had taken my past, my future, and now it would never let me go. The final rule had been the most important one: leave before sunrise. But I was too late.